everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am so excited to tell you about all of the books that I hope to read in May. Now, most of my reading this month is going to be historical fiction because I am participating in Katie's historical fiction readathon this month. That is Katie of Books and Things, whose announcement video I will link down below. I have quite a large stack next to me here, and that is mainly because I have multiple options for a lot of these prompts, and we'll see what I actually feel like reading as the time gets nearer. The one book that does not fit into any of the prompts for the readathon, however, is my non-fiction book for the month, and that will be Hooked by Sutton Foster, How Crafting Saved My Life. I was lucky enough to see Sutton Foster this past week, as of now when I'm filming it, in The Music Man, and she and Hugh Jackman were wonderful, and so I'm really intrigued to get to know more about her and her connection to crafting. She is an incredible crafter. If you follow her on Instagram, you can see a lot of the projects that she finishes. And as a crafter myself, I am intrigued to see what insights she has to our wonderful hobby. My other monthly challenge to myself, as you may know, is to read one classic every month, but that actually falls into one of the historical readathon prompts, so I'll tell you about that in a moment. The first prompt for this readathon is to read a piece of historical fiction from the country that you are from, or that is set where you are from. I honestly really struggled with this one. I do not enjoy American history, and thus I do not have a lot of American-based historical fiction on my TBR. I just don't. I think European history is far more interesting than American history. There's a far more personal aspect to it, with the warring families and monarchs, things that you don't get when you're just cycling through presidents every 4 years. But in any case, I rated my TBR, and I did in fact have 2 books set in North America at the very least. And we'll see which one I feel like reading. The first is The Chaperone by Laura Moriarty. And this is about a girl who I'm not sure if she was a real person, but they claim that Louise Brooks would go on to become one of the major silent film stars of her generation. And it's about her as a 15-year-old leaving Kansas to go and study in New York. And Cora, who is the woman who is assigned to chaperone her, and everything that happens to both of them and their journeys of self-discovery in New York of the 1920s. I know this was a television film a few years ago with, her name is escaping me right now, but the woman who plays, ironically, Cora in Downton Abbey also plays this Cora. And I've been meaning to watch it for ages, but I've been wanting to read the book first. So I might read this one. Or I could also read the short story collection Astray by Emma Donahue, which, as far as I know, takes place throughout North America, so the US and Canada predominantly. And it's about people who went astray, either in terms of their physical location or who somehow broke boundaries for themselves, be those economic boundaries, gender boundaries, romantic boundaries. And it sounds really, really interesting, and if I'm not in the mood for an entire historical fiction set in the US, short stories could be a good option. The second prompt is to read a piece of historical fiction set in a country that is different from the country you are from, and honestly, the rest of this stack fit this prompt, so I won't talk about those for this prompt, and you'll see which ones I've chosen in the following prompts. Number 3, read a piece of historical fiction set in your favorite time period. And so for this, I have chosen The French Lesson by Hallie Rubenhold. And this is the sequel to Mistress of My Fate, which you can see right there. So it is the second book in the Henrietta Lightfoot series. So I can't tell you much about this one, but I can tell you that Henrietta finds herself in France, in Revolutionary era France, and we follow her journey from there. The first book is Moll Flanders-ish, but honestly much more palatable than Moll Flanders. And Henrietta goes on a roller coaster of a societal journey, trying to find her true place and to find love, but also financial stability, which in the 18th century for a single woman is incredibly difficult. So I am really excited to have my hands on book 2 and find out what happens to her in Revolutionary France. The French Revolution isn't necessarily my favorite time period, but I do love the late Georgian and Regency eras. The next prompt is to read a piece of historical fiction set in a period that you are less familiar with. So for this, again, I have two choices. Could be either The Shadowy Horses by Susanna Kearsley, part of which takes place, I believe, in the modern day, but they are investigating Roman-era Britain and Scotland, I believe, predominantly, which I know very little about. So I'm counting this as a time period that I am less familiar with. Or I could also read A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes. Ancient Rome, ancient Greece is also an era that I am less familiar with as compared to other periods of history. I'm counting this as historical fiction. I think archaeologists have found evidence that the Trojan Wars did indeed happen, with or without interference from the gods. So I'm counting this. This was huge on BookTube a couple of years ago, but if you're unfamiliar, it is a retelling of the Trojan Wars from a female perspective. The next prompt is to read historical fiction with a speculative element. And for this, I am taking Katie's recommendation and potentially going to read The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton, which, as you can tell, is huge. That's why I'm having trouble keeping it steady with one hand. This is the story of a young man who I believe travels to New Zealand in, if not the Victorian era, an era that feels very like the Victorian era. And magically real things begin to happen from there. It has sounded wonderful, and I've been wanting to read it for ages. And I know it was a television series, I believe, last year. That also looks really, really wonderful, so I hope I get to read it. It is, however, a mammoth, so we'll see how my reading goes. Next, read a piece of historical fiction about a real person or a specific historical event. And for this, I have chosen Cecily by Annie Garthwaite. And this is about Cecily Neville, I believe, who was a very important mother figure in the Wars of the Roses, but whom we hear very little about in real historical texts. So this retells the Wars of the Roses from her perspective, which I think will be really, really interesting. Plus, this has gotten wonderful reviews from Sarah Moss, Imogen Hermes Gower, authors that I love and trust. Next, read a classic work of historical fiction. And for this, I originally planned on reading Kenilworth by Sir Walter Scott, and I still might, as it is a piece of, I believe, Regency, well, early 19th century historical fiction about the Tudor era. And I'm really intrigued to read it. I'm intrigued to read Walter Scott again because I haven't since university. Plus, there's an opera based on this, which is not part of Donizetti's Tudor trilogy, but it's still a Tudor opera of his. So I really think they should make it a Tudor quartet. But nonetheless, I would like to listen to that as well. So I could still read this. Or I suddenly realized that Sylvia's Lovers, which came in for me rather recently, is also historical fiction. It was written in the Victorian era, but it takes place in Cornwall at the end of the 18th century. which is another of my favorite settings and time periods, so I could read this as well. And I haven't wanted to read too much about this plot either, because I think either Goodreads or the back of this book gives you way too much information and potential spoilers. But it is clearly about a woman called Sylvia who is torn between two potential suitors for a variety of reasons. And the final bonus challenge is to read a work of historical fiction over 500 pages. And for this, I could, of course, go for the Luminaries, which my copy is 830 pages here, or also in a nod to the Asian readathon, which is going on in May, I could also read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. And this copy is, not counting Reader's Guide, shoot, it's not quite 500, it's 479. Do we think it still counts? I don't know. But I would like to read this anyway, in a nod to the Asian Readathon, as I mentioned, whose announcement video I will also link down below. Also because it is another period of history that I am very unfamiliar with. It is about, I believe, the Japanese occupation of Korea in the early 1900s. And it's a familial saga from there. I originally wanted to read this, and then I was put off because I thought I had heard too many spoilers from other booktubers who were filming their reading experience. However, in watching the trailer for the Apple TV series that came out recently, I realized that it is in fact a generational saga, which I did not realize. So I think the spoilers that I got are not great enough to spoil everything within this text the way I thought they were. I hope that made sense. So I could also read this. Maybe not for the 500-page bonus, but this is another potential read on my list for a couple of other challenges. So there you have it. Those are my options for the historical fiction readathon, and I'll let you know as I go which ones I have actually chosen. And you can also follow me on Goodreads, which is linked down below if you want to find out in the moment what I am reading. So thank you so much to Katie for hosting this readathon and for helping me get around to a number of books that I've been wanting to read. If you're also participating, let me know what your TBR is down below. And if you hadn't heard of this before, but you have other suggestions for me for historical fiction I may enjoy, please let me know in the comments as well. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.